Happy webinar day, Liv.
Happy webinar day. How you doing?
Pretty solid. Yeah, like, a little bit rainy and cloudy, and I'm glad that you have a white background because I'm tired of seeing all of your like tropic things happening in your tropic worlds. While
Oh,
we're in like the snowy rain of at least for me Halifax, and I know snow's kind of gone across the country a little bit. For depending on where you're calling from, where people are dialing in from.
yeah, I think the worst for me is that it was a little windy this morning.
Yeah, I
So,
can't even. Yeah. Anyways, that's funny.
no, that being said, our next session, I will be back in Canada, I believe.
Yeah, you'll be in
So,
the hardships of Toronto. That's funny.
exactly.
What's going? What
Uh,
else is going on in your world?
Um, goodness, not much. Got settled in. I'm for our audience, where in the world is live right now. I'm in Guatemala, which I think maybe was there last time as well, but I'm in my final month. And yeah, just trying to. I had my birthday celebration last week, which was exciting, and did some solo stuff then. And now we're here, getting back into the swing of things. Anything on your end?
No, not. I mean, today we're going out. I'm going out with my partner for dinner to a really awesome restaurant in Halifax, and um, as the week moves along, I find myself preparing for the weekend to do what is my real work, which is managing the kids' social calendars and also like emotional dynamics between each other. I think that's actually the stuff that drains me most versus the day to day. During the week's just vacation time, really. It's,
Well, I'm actually curious. Do you like with all that scheduling, do you ever use AI to help you with that scheduling and just trying to get life on track?
no, we haven't. And I know in talking to Chris, because he helps us out with our IT stuff, he always tells me you can't just like turn on AI and expect it's going to automate everything in your life. Like you've got to do some stuff first to make that happen.
Mm.
And my partner is not necessarily the most tech advanced, and so we're not there yet. But it's definitely something that is in my mind as I think about where we're headed as a business, or even personally, like how can we leverage some things to take off? Because my wife and I jokingly say like we need an admin assistant for our kids' social calendar, and they're like 7, 5, and 3. So I can only imagine as they get older, it's going to get worse. So yeah.
Well, I mean, before we even introduce our guests, because for our audience today, you know that we're talking about using AI with intention. We're talking about that in relation to business and leadership and all of that good stuff. But Jesse, tell me a little bit about your initial reactions. Like you haven't implemented AI yet within your personal life. Are you using it in your professional one yet? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I actually use like over the last year, I've used it quite a bit personally, uh, like as like a tool for me, but not as like an efficiency tool, more as like a guide and coach actually, where even some really charged conversations I've had with like both our kids and my wife, where we're like unsure. We kind of thought we knew where things were. I actually end up like engaging with AI one night and to give some coaching on like addressing this one particular issue. And it was really fascinating to see the coaching it gave, the compassion it had, um, to the point where and I always try to engage with them in like a really kind and polite way. And where at the end of it, it said, it seems as if you're really prioritizing creating a compassionate and supportive household for your children. Just know that the journey you're on with here can be really hard, and it's important to have some compassion for yourself. And I was just like, what? I almost started like tearing up, like feeling. It was a really interesting thing. But where I started kind of thinking about AI and the reason I came across it actually I was asked last year to do a keynote on mental health and AI and how that would kind of interact with one another. And to that point, I was starting to think about it. I was getting exposed to different content. I was looking at it more through the human lens of like, how is this stuff influencing our humanity? Is it pushing us even beyond human scale? Which, for those that know Brene Brown, like she did a really awesome series. Actually, it was about 6 or 7 podcasts on through varying perspectives about AI and how even just generally as a world right now, we're living beyond this idea of our human capacity to process things. And it got me to a place where like recognizing that this is happening, it's going to be very powerful. It's going to change a lot of the way in which we live. and feeling as if really the only part of its development that I can contribute effectively to is being a good steward of its like learning emotion, like learning some values and ethics, so that if there are folks in there that have, you know, other intentions on what this thing could do, that perhaps it has some morals to say, no, that's actually not a great idea. And so that's what convinced me to start really engaging the tool more regularly, and even actually treating it with respect. And the way I converse in and looking at it as like it's another domain in which I can live my values, another tool to help me do that. So, you know, it's for me been something that's been quite interesting in terms of the breadth of the conversation, because it can go many ways. And so I'm really curious to see where we go today with our guests.
Yeah, and I think I'll maybe introduce them now because we do have two incredible experts on. First up, we have Melissa Lloyd, who's an entrepreneur, AI educator, and certified prompt engineer specializing in AI mindset, education, and implementation. Um, as a global and multi-business owner, she bridges the gap between AI and business strategy, helping non-techies shift their mindset, simplify AI adoption, and confidently integrate it into their business operations. So she sounds exactly like what I need. So,
Well,
welcome.
thank you for the introduction.
It's so lovely to have you on. And we also have Chris Doucette, who has spent over 15 years bridging the gap between users and technology. As practice lead IT at Super City Office Systems, he specializes in IT strategy, cloud services, and voice systems, ensuring secure, cutting-edge solutions for thousands of users. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Liv.
Hey, so nice to have you both on. You heard Jesse and I talking a little bit about, how, or especially how Jesse's kind of implementing it and how he started. Maybe before we even get into like the main AI stuff, what's top of mind for you right now? And do you have any comments, maybe how you first started getting into AI and how that became your specialized area? Melissa, do you want to go first, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, as a kind of an entrepreneur, multiple businesses, I kind of came to a critical point in 2022 when I started to question about how to efficiently run a business. And I'm like, there's got to be an easier way. And so I was introduced to generative AI then, and really my background is kind of steeped in creativity as well globally. And I thought, well, there's no way it can do all, all of what people are saying. And so I went in and started to have business use case scenarios where I had pain points that I was trying to solve, and I couldn't believe that every single time that I would engage and go through this process, how much I was able to get back, not only in time, but just even in terms of thinking and being able to create dialogue back and forth. And actually, Jesse mentioned something that was really kind of in alignment with myself, where I realized in 2022 that there are going to be voices in AI where it can go one of two ways. And I really did want to be a positive influence and a positive voice, and seeing it from a very different lens where it's kind of been this big scary monster in many different ways. And because of the emotional intelligence background, I found it fascinating that I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be all that. And if I can do it, everyone can do it. So 2022 was definitely my journey into, deep into AI. And it just, from that point, it kind of kept going, and it's been fascinating ever since.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, true educator. Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And Chris, your entryway.
Um, and it's funny, like my entryway is kind of a little bit the opposite, because my job from day to day is to kind of parse through all the technologies that are coming through and help our clients understand um, which of those products are going to make sense, which are going to be secure, and I where Melissa's a little more on the optimistic side, I have to play the pessimist role a lot of the time to kind of like pull it back and say, hey, we gotta take a breather. Let's not just turn all this stuff on. Let's understand what's going to happen and how we're going to deploy it. So um, you know, my first drop in, I guess, was the same as many people's. What's this Chat GPT thing? Let's play with this. Oh, this is really cool. But from there, you know, uh, I get tons of emails every week of, hey, we now have AI. Hey, we now have AI. And so we have to parse through and understand what are the impacts for our clients and how we pull that together to make sure it's nice and secure.
I love and we've chatted a bit about this, but that's why I love having the two of you a part of this conversation. Is I love creating space for the possibilities. And I also love, like for you, Chris, within this, and we have a lot of folks in the municipal world, where security, stability are so critical to how they do things. Because if we do things in ways that kind of disrupt that, it can really have significant impacts for many folks. And not that, Melissa, you wouldn't consider those things, but
No.
I think just adding the like expertise in that, because for me, whenever we do things, I like to look at it in its holistic picture, so that then we can make choices that align to the values we hold, and be intentional as best as possible. Because I think this is, for me, when I look at AI, it is a very human problem, because in which you are going to have to challenge ourselves with uncertainty. We're going to have to challenge ourselves with discomfort. We're going to have to release control in many ways. And all of this can come with a whole gamut of emotional experience that, I think requires us to be intentional with how we move through. But maybe to get us started, I'm curious on both your sides, and maybe I'll go to you first, Chris, and then we'll go to you, Melissa. When you think of AI, just at the highest level, what are the one or two awesome factors? Like, that's like, yeah, this is super cool. And maybe what are the one or two, deep concerns that you have about it? And we'll start with you, Chris, and then we'll go to you, Melissa.
Sure. It's funny. I really only have one answer for both questions, which is it's so easy. And on the plus side, it's so easy. I can just say, actually, this is a great example. Yesterday, we were pricing up a new product and trying to understand all the pieces, and somebody had put that into a Word doc. Within seconds, I highlighted the whole thing, right click, said turn it into a table, and it flipped it right into a table. It's so easy. It was just within seconds, something that would have took me easily 20 minutes to get it to look right and have the right cell sizes. On the flip side, it's so easy. We just dumped all that pricing information in there. Was it put in securely? Who had access to that document? Was it in the proper place? Did we just send it to a client to have the right? And so it's so easy, really just kind of summarizes the whole thing for me, of like, there are so many awesome and wonderful things that it can do, and I'm excited about the future. On the other hand, like, we have to pump the brakes sometimes and say, like, okay, where's this going? Have we done this correctly? Let's not accidentally dump everyone's payroll information into AI. That's for me, like, that's both the plus and minus of what I'm seeing on AI.
I feel like that's such a human thing where, we often lean one way or the other, but like, to me, so many times our greatest superpowers are often the things that are like our greatest weaknesses, as well as we interact and build relationships with folks. And so to me, like, it speaks so cleanly to that. And so for you, Melissa, what jumps up is the one or two awesome things, and maybe the one or two deep concerns you have.
Yeah, I love that Chris says it's so easy, because it is so easy in the respect of helping with so many tasks and so many things that cost businesses a lot of productivity and bottom line, and even down to cultural ecosystems and well-being. Right now, we're at an incredible time of burnout as well. And so I see AI as a really helpful extension to every business, no matter, and every person's role, to be able to help with enhancing business capacity and productivity. And of course, I'm going to weigh in on the creativity side. I think this is a really interesting time. After going to Las Vegas for the first generative AI conference, one thing that was really clear is that this is a real opportunity for everyone to be able to really lean into creativity in a way that maybe was not accessible before, and innovation. So it's giving people the confidence in these little safe spaces to be able to explore their own creative spirit. And yes, we all have them. It's just they need to be dusted off. And so I think that part of this AI process can be really great for sandboxing and innovation in terms of companies. But there's also, like Chris says, and I always appreciate the other side, which I'm really kind of conscious of, is really kind of going into democratizing, or just knowing that sometimes if we use it too much, or we lean on it too much, where it ends up kind of taking our critical thinking skills. Like, how are people actually, how's it actually having impact on our thinking? Are we relying on it too heavily because it's so easy, as Chris says? So that has deep impact. And also, just I found working with so many clients, just not knowing how to use the tools or understanding the tools, which ties into risk and understanding the biases. We already have so many issues with biases. And so what people don't realize is that when we take those small steps and we feel comfortable and we feel confident and we've been supported in an environment, we start to be part of that whole problem, which is, you know, our biases start to break down even more. So those are two kind of areas that I would say are on the not so exciting side of AI.
Yeah, I think about that. Like, I remember in the early days, they were pointing at some of those biases as like, oh, the AI wasn't working right. And then when they dove in on further research, like in actuality, it is working right. It's just amplifying the embedded biases or fact, like, you know, even discrimination that was happening within whatever given system. And so it's about like, how are we resetting that? And so can sometimes alleviate some of those things for us that I think is can be jarring. And then for me, the other one I react to within what you said is I'm a big believer in the idea of like creating space for ourselves. The thing I want to challenge ourselves in thinking within that is what happens with that space. Are we filling it with more stuff, which we have often done at times where we just fill, you know, focus on profit, power, more in whatever way. But if we're creating space for creativity, for reflection, for connection, I'm all about those things. And so I think it's where it comes back down to with organizations on how are we intentionally using this to actually amplify our values or live our values as an organization versus get into that like tasty nugget of like, oh, wow, something that took me 20 minutes now takes me 3 seconds. Oh, now I can do 35 of those or whatever, and not just adding more to the plate. But that being said, I'm curious when you think about AI, like what is the compelling argument? And you kind of laid down some of the awesome things, but maybe for you, Melissa, like what's the compelling argument to why AI is something we might want to fit into our life? Like, because it sounds as if you get a chance to meet with folks that are hesitant, if not maybe pretending it doesn't even exist. And so where do you start with those individuals to say, well, this is actually maybe why we should engage with it a little bit?
Well, and this is all very individualistic, like you said about values. So whether it's a business or it's an individual, there's always pain points for people. There's always friction. There's always the barriers in place. So I often really lean into that piece where, you know, where is there areas in your life, in your job, in different parts? How can AI actually help solve some of those? And how can it do some of the heavy lifting? But even before that, you kind of mentioned something as well. So many people are hesitant because of, well, the things that are around us and the what ifs. We are humans. We don't like change. We like, you know, predictable patterns. So the biggest thing right now is about mindset. That is the key. Like, anybody can learn AI. I'm just letting you know, you absolutely can. If you're on this call and you're like, nope, not in techie, can't do it. I absolutely, if I can do it, you can do it. But I think the biggest piece is that taking that first step is really, really hard, especially when there's so much uncertainty around. But know that a lot of the time is down to your mindset. And that's where I spend a lot of time in that area, specifically trying to get people to realize what that mindset is and how do they break down that barrier so that it can engage them in a new way of being curious and being able to see the opportunity and the risks, and being able to kind of walk that line in a way that's very very focused, very clear. It's got a lot of clarity.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there on mindset, because I think of even some of our past conversations. You know, you highlighted that you can see folks tending to be really short, really direct, like almost like, just give me that thing over there. And not having, you know, quorum almost, or decorum, how they're actually conversing with the tool. And I find that's what's really interesting in my experience of where it starts to then where it evolved to based on how I interact with it. And, you know, that to me is also an area where as we're becoming less and less connected, less and less like human, if all we're doing is interacting with tech, or even like how we do social media, where it is very depersonalized. But if you have that mindset where you're approaching it in that way, I think that's a really critical point to consider as at the individual level, for sure. Like that this is just another place in which I'm going to, live a life of respect and kindness, if that's the thing that really value.
Yeah, and I think that whole like it being tech and being something that there's a lot of automative and less human aspects to this whole world right now. I think that it's really causing people to really consider how they walk through their daily life, whether it's in their personal life or their business, or within the organization,
Mm,
how they walk through that more intentionally. I think AI is actually creating that almost that stop sign for a
yeah,
lot
the
of
mirror.
people. And that's a really great place to be. And I always encourage people, like we all come from different places, and we all arrive at different points, and we also don't all have to have the same story. So if you're
Sure.
uncomfortable with AI, then that's absolutely okay. I'm in the world all the time of AI, and do I feel optimistic about AI all the time? Absolutely not. But I have to use my mindset in order to refocus and reshift or recompass
Mm,
where I'm actually going with it. And just be able to really kind of look at some of those things that are pain points or difficult
sure.
conversations, and be able to navigate them in a way that feels right for me.
Yeah. And I think you raised a good point about like human, and Chris, I think about when in our chats, because we get to be one of your businesses that you support, and I get to call and bug on all things tech related. So
Once or twice.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember actually even talking to you recently about being one of those emails probably of AI, and being like, and you're like, well, what is it that you want it to do? What is the
Yeah.
purpose of your thing? And for me, it really percolates this concept of like keeping a human in the loop of really any technology, but even specifically with AI. And I'm curious, like when you think about that, like what does that mean for you when you think about keeping a human in the loop?
Um, I mean, it has a couple different meanings, right? To me, um, and again, where my background is really process driven. I'm helping businesses figure out how to use IT as a tool set. I mean, if I can deviate for just 2 seconds, because let's say something that kind of made me think about this. Um, I think to your point of like some people don't feel comfortable approaching AI. One of the things I like to remind people is, to me, this is no different than the printing press. This is no different than moving from horses to cars. That thing is scary. It just moves by itself. Like, what do you mean? Like, it's not a living being. How is it moving? Or the printing press. Both could be used for either positive or negative. But at some point, you're just going to hop in a car and go for a ride and see how much fun it is, safely. So, coming back to that, how does the human fit in the loop? I mean, both of those processes, like the printing press needed to be set, the car needed a driver. We're in that loop. Like it's important to remember where you are in that loop. And I think a lot of our clients think like, hey, if I buy this thing, I don't have to do X anymore. And it's like, no, no, like you're not going to have to do 3 parts of X, but you're still going to have to do the other 3. And
Mm,
remembering that there is going to be a human in the loop for most of this stuff,
mm,
especially not in the short term. We're not ready to let AI just kind of run rampant and
mm.
do a bunch of things. There really does need to be that check and balance in place. Um,
Is
which
that really one of the critical functions that they could play, is supporting in that accountability, or like kind of
Yeah.
guiding that? Like how do you see that? How do you see them actually really being a part of I guess that guidance, if really is what you're saying with AI?
It's a hammer. It's a hammer, right? And so, or a drill, whatever, however you want that analogy to live in out of a toolbox. But a hammer's not going to just hammer nails. Like there's no purpose in just hammering nails. But AI would do that. It would just go and do the same task over and over again. At the end of the day, I want to build this thing. I need a tool to do that. I don't really want to swing the hammer the 100 times I'm going to put a nail into something. So I can find this tool to say, hey, this is how I want to put these nails in. And that's kind of the construction one is the one that I tend to talk about clients with the most. Is
Mm,
it kind
mm,
of helps with that analogy of this is not you're not hiring a carpenter to build that thing. It's a tool
yeah.
that you're going to use to do that. And it's more, maybe it's more of a drill than a hammer, because now you could just screw it in rather than having to
Yeah.
hammer a bunch. The analogy breaks down a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's, at the end of the day, it's just another tool in your set to get something done. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Right. Back
Yeah.
to our conversation the other day. What are you trying to
Yeah.
accomplish? What do you want AI to do? And we'll help you find a tool that'll match that use case.
Gotcha. Is there anything you'd add similar or different, Melissa?
I think there's like, I actually use a conductor. So you use
Mhm.
the hammer and I use the conductor analogy of being empowered as a conductor and being able to use all these pieces and being able to kind of move through the spaces, be able to watch all parts come together. That's where inevitably we're going to end up in terms of, if we're talking about AI agents and kind of what this AI world looks like. But I want to bring it back for a sec, because I always, again, it is all about tools, 100%. Like, how is it going to help me do my job more efficiently or work smarter or do things in different ways? But there's also a big, it's, I call it like the AI digital renaissance. It's how we're working is changing. And so it's not
Mm,
just, it is because of the tool, but how we're thinking about how we work is actually changing. And I know that's like a very abstract concept. And sometimes people are like, what are you talking about? Until they actually get into using these tools, and then they start to reimagine and they start to see actually how I'm working is in fact changing.
yeah.
So I like, again, if it can be very abstract, but I'll just use an example of, say, ChatGPT as something basic. Whoever's decided to go in and start to use ChatGPT as one of their tools will know from, the beginning, when they started to use it, were uncertain, not sure if they're going to break it, asking those simple questions, to, 6 months later or even a year later, now it's like your thought partner. It's not even like just a tool on one side of, go, okay, help me create these email sequences in like,
Mm,
2 seconds versus me crafting it for 25 minutes. It's really this thought leadership. So I think AI as a whole, um, it's changing the way that we're thinking,
yeah.
which
And I wonder within that idea, like, do we have, because one of my, kind of touched on one of my concerns is the speed of which it's changed. Although I suspect, like, if you transported yourself back to the printing press, it would have felt this stuff is changing at like a rate in which we never could imagine. Um, it feels though, when we look at the quantity of data, that all of these things now, like, it just feels we're at a time point in which we've never experienced this like rapidness of change. And so when I look at, like, if we've got some decreased skill, a lot of things coming at us, and perhaps not the ecosystem set up to enable it's where we can become vulnerable. And when I've been in chats, and I don't come across them a ton, but in hearing the conversations, I hear about AI being talked about. We want to use this the right way. We want to ensure that it's aligned to what we want, or how we see ourselves, or the values we have. And Chris, I'm wondering for you, like, I guess, like, if we're all kind of saying we want this to be the right way, like, what does that mean? And like, maybe how do we actually get that to happen?
Um, that's probably like the $1 billion question, right? Of how do you do it? I mean, there are some basic. I guess there are some basic things you can kind of do to approach it in a general sense, right? And it is it's that whole market is growing at an exponential rate. There's new tools every day. There are new variations of kinds of AI. It's changing so many industries. Music's a huge one.
Mm,
Like, you don't you don't record instruments necessarily anymore. Like, you can just go somewhere and put together a set, and you kind of start from the beginning, and then you move forward on, oh, I want to change this thing. So I don't have to start with blank page syndrome anymore, right? There's somewhere to jump ahead and say, here I am. So when you think I guess starting from there, making sure you have a purpose in mind, but being careful about the data and how it's going in, um, and making sure somebody understands how those things are going to connect. I don't. That's kind of for again a little hard for me because on the I'm always thinking about that low level IT foundational piece of just okay, where how do you start there? But if you're talking about from an individual perspective, um, talk with friends, figure out what's um, you know what's this thing that's really bugging me right now, and just kind of again, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Claude, whether it's Microsoft Copilot, just try it. Just and be careful with the information you put in, but you'll start to get a feel of like, oh, these are the types of things I can ask. These are the responses I'll get, and it's that's going to give you a good sense. From an organizational perspective, you want to have a committee, somebody you can talk to and say, this is how I'm using this. Oh, this is how we're using this, and you get a feel for that. We often get asked to provision a lot of licenses at once, and it's just a bad kind of a bad approach because you'll end up with people who may not use it, or you may end up with some unclarity of what makes sense. You almost want to like do it virally. Start with a couple key
Mm,
people, let them tell a couple more people, okay, provision more licenses and so forth.
mm.
But yeah, that's for in the most basic sense, I guess that's how I would describe starting.
Sounds like it's, and I'll jump to you, Melissa, to add on, but it sounds like the approach is whoever you are, like don't jump all the way in right away. Like kind of start a little bit with a specific area and then build from there versus yeah, thinking I need to implement this whole thing organizationally wide. But Melissa, is there anything else you'd add in on that?
Sorry, just before Melissa, you get in, I just one thing, Chris, that you triggered my own question about is actually just when you say that be careful from an organizational perspective of the type of data that you put in and that kind of thing. Are
Oh
there
yeah.
any general guardrails that you have to share with listeners? Like, would it be something like don't put in financial information or don't put in full names? Like, is there anything really basic from that perspective that you're talking about?
Um, I guess you're getting kind of into the crux of kind of like our role as an IT provider for businesses. Um, like we're helping clients sort out that type of data and like where that's going to go. Essentially, if we're talking like a general consumer level, because this is the common thing we're seeing, people will have like a ChatGPT or Claude account, and they're just copying and pasting data back and forth because not their company's not necessarily providing the product. That's scary because there is no guardrails there from a technology perspective. Maybe you have a written policy that says don't do that, but it's pretty easy to just kind of forget of like, oh, I should just try this thing. Could even be an accidental copy and paste. So we're a big Microsoft partner, so we tend to lean more towards on the Copilot side. And with Copilot, we have ways of putting technical guardrails in place. And the way that Microsoft handled that, it does it in a I can't remember the official term, but essentially it's in a bucket, and all that data gets processed in your bucket that belongs to you before it goes out to the larger models. The biggest problem with all of this is the infrastructure to do it is so expensive. It doesn't. We're getting there in terms of the cost being available for people to have their own AI servers, but the cards that most of these companies are using are $100,000 a card, and you might need 4 or 5 cards for a machine. They're filling data centers and data centers with these things. And so you think about that, but now we're all sharing that infrastructure. Everyone's kind of dipping in and out. So it might be something I just ask simply of like, hey, um, what's your opinion on this person? And it might be pulling in conversations I had. If I didn't, or I had in other conversations, it could have been conversations that other people had, and it made its way into that infrastructure in some way. That's the fear we have. And that's why making sure you take a good approach of, okay, I'm going to be very careful and thoughtful about what I put into this. Again, for something like Copilot, they do a good job of protecting that. Claude is another one that they have a lot more of those guardrails built in, where I think ChatGPT is kind of more focused on like forward momentum. And there are guardrails in there as well. I'd recommend you check in the settings, make sure that you're saying, don't put my data back into the model. Remember, at the end of the day, these things get better because we teach them more things. So yeah.
Even extending before you jump in, Melissa, like what you just said there, like what's your opinion on Jane? My experience is that it will also often present back the reasons in which why it came to this opinion of Jane. And so if in that scenario, it's possible that it could pull private and confidential information or discussions with HR, or like it could pull from a bunch of stuff that then gives you like a complete profile of why Jane is good or bad, that, you know, result in like exposing some of her, you know, underlying health conditions or whatever. So it's interesting. I think that was a really cool analogy of where a really nothing question could, again, without effective implementation and guardrails, which speaks to why going small first is so critical, could create a whole storm for folks if they're not being, you know, to your point, Melissa, being very intentional about how they're doing this. And I know I was about to go to you, and thanks, Liv, for that jumping in on that question. But is there anything else you would add into, you know, maybe how we prevent that risk from occurring, Melissa, based on your experiences?
I think it ties back to the AI responsibly and what that means. And I think that is fundamentally aligned with the organization's values, and what they, you know, when we're looking at fairness, human oversight, transparency, the privacy element, and even the bigger picture thinking. So considering how AI might impact society, not just the bottom line of your organization. What I see a lot of companies doing right now, because as we all want to, oh my gosh, we've got to do this AI thing, we've got to get it into our businesses. A lot of what's happening is there's like a top-down approach with AI. So be able to bring AI into the organization. Here's 25 use case scenarios. And again, to Chris's point, well, of course, there's, you know, you've got to be able to be taken through this process in a way that's absolutely safe. But also really kind of realizing that it comes back to when I say about those values and responsible AI, how are we actually empowering our people in the organization? So we have actually a bottom up approach with AI always. So it's bringing that human piece and element in, where even at a leadership level, everybody understands that how you use it, and you know, when you're in alignment with your organizational values. Because what I have learned is that some organizations, it's perfect to go AI down. I want to put all these use case scenarios in, and they have a different agenda for their vision and future. And then there's other people that are like, hang on a second, those are not my values. We want to preserve our people, and really we want to grow using this AI technology. So again, AI responsibly is that's quite a big conversation, and there's not a one size fits all, because there's so many parts to that whole, I believe.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. It's just bringing in because I think it also culturally almost negates the possibility of some of those risks from happening, because you're bringing varying perspectives to the conversation that I think only enhance the possible effectiveness of it, for sure. That's really cool.
Well, and when you have a tool, like the tool, we can teach everyone to say, okay, this is the impact. This is what this is how you set it up. This is what you do and what you don't do based on, you know, data, based on privacy policy, client work. You can, again, teach all that. But I think that fundamentally organizations really have to think about, you know, what are they trying to solve? Where are they at? Are they you know, top down approach, or they, you know, bottom up approach? And then, you know, you can go in, and of course you can manage the settings, and you can create a model that's more private, so that it, you know, if you've got higher impact data that needs to be, you know, held behind something so it's not seen. There's ways to do that, and Chris is obviously one of those people that can certainly help with that. But I think there's a lot of questions that have to happen at the front end rather than just diving in.
Yeah. Again, I guess I keep hearing it comes back to this intentional component about being real intentional about it, and I love the comment too, because for the conversation I have had, or even the stuff I've listened to, it really seems that we're in like these two camps of either we need it yesterday, in which we're like running without any sort of concern or thought to what we want to do, or this thing doesn't ever exist and I'm just gonna like bury myself in the sand and pretend it's not there. And I think, you know, both are obviously not um, ideal places to be standing. And I think it actually helps. It ends up where we're moving away from things out of fear or toward things out of fear versus, again, what is it we want out of this? Um, Maybe my last question that I'll ask, um, more simpler one, and then we'll get to just seeing some questions roll in from the audience. Have you seen, and I'll throw it out, and then if one of you want to jump in, feel free. Have you seen some workplaces that have handled AI implementation like well? And I guess what did they do to make that happen? And what kind of things do you see they do with folks that maybe have been really resistant and in that process? Does either of you have something that jump out that you could share with the audience on how, you know, this is a way of some leading practices and what we've seen?
I can jump in on that. I mean, I
Yeah.
have it on two fronts. What we had one company that I worked with, their approach was to really foster that human piece and making sure, because again, a lot of people are afraid of like, what does this mean for my job? What does this mean as leadership? What does this mean? Like, there's a lot of what ifs right now.
Mm,
And so realizing and recognizing the importance of being able to give everyone that opportunity to foster an AI mindset and what that means so that they can
mm,
be on an actual level playing ground before that they take the next step has been critical. Because if you can implement technology all day long, but if you don't have buy-in, or if you don't have people that are not feeling good about any of it, it probably won't do your organization very well unless you're looking for a very lean
yeah.
organization. So that was something that I realized was like a very good use case scenario, where never really thought about it, but once they had people excited, even the ones that were AI grumpy, which is always a term I love. Um, it's not about
That's
change,
great. I love that.
is it? I was like, that's a
It's so
brilliant term.
good.
AI
Grumpy.
grumpy. So, and that's come up twice, just so you know. I had a real AI grumpy business owner who went from literally, you're not convincing me, and I'm never here to convince anybody. It's just being able to give you the tools and the framework so you can come to it yourself in whatever way feels comfortable. But once they realized after 2 sessions exactly how to switch, you basically flip the switch and how they're showing up in their world, it was unbelievable. It's like they had this freedom in a way, and then they ended up being booked on this in this conference in Boston on a stage, and they were the actual AI presenter. So how do you go
No
from
way.
AI
That's
grumpy,
awesome.
I have it all recorded, to I'm now on a very big stage and I'm actually in my space. So that's how big AI mindset is. And if you don't ever think about it, that's what's holding a lot of people back right now.
Yeah. Maybe one last one that just popped up based on what you were saying there, and even, you know, I'll come back to a question or a statement you made earlier, Chris, around like it's so easy. And I think you even talked about this too, Melissa, and that like it can give you information. And I've even found at times it's like you kind of made that up. Like that's, and then when you ask the references, it's like quoting another AI almost. And I look at it very much like my kids. Like there'll be sometimes you ask them like what happened today, and they'll just make up some stuff that like a dragon was there, and you're like, that didn't happen, obviously, but you're not going to get it arguing about it. So I think about it in that development that like, of course it's going to make things up. It's just growing and learning right now. That being said, though, I think it's important for folks to learn how to be critical, because it's not like Google. Like where Google will say, here's the sites, here's 100, do your research and figure it out. AI will just say, here's what you need to know. And so I'm curious, Chris, and I'll get you to jump into Melissa, and then we'll go to questions. Maybe if you could keep it real short, like what are some ways in which you could think critically about the information? Are there any like tips you'd have for that? Because I think that's a real important part of like not just accepting it at face value in some ways.
Um, a lot of the services are changing now to provide you links to how they kind of got to some of the answers. Again, it depends on which ones you're using. Um, again, we're a Microsoft shop, and that's one of the things Copilot does now. If you ask a question and it's grabbing from the web, it will give you the footnotes. Hey, I pulled together these 3 emails. That's how I came to that answer. Make sure you're checking for that. But also, I mean, to your point, it's not like Google. It's gonna become Google really quickly because that's the product that everyone's going after, including Google. Right? We won't. That's the biggest shift I kind of see. So, yeah, it's a loaded one. I don't know, Melissa, maybe you have more to add on that one, but I see that one coming, but I think it's still forming on how I would help someone navigate
People look critically.
yeah. Well, what's the difference between real facts and hallucinations? Should there be glue in my pizza recipe? You can look that up. That was a legitimate answer from the Google's AI when it was first released. How do you make a pizza? And it was pulling from like when they do photography for food. And so it's like, don't forget to add the
'Cause
glue
there's
into the
glue on the
cheese.
yeah.
Well, that's how you get the really sticky, pulley cheese, right?
Yeah,
But
that's a good point.
I want to make a pizza. How do I make it? Well, put it in the glue. So yeah, I don't know. I guess a little bit of common sense, but also try and get the footnotes, find out where it's getting the information.
Cool.
Hmm.
What about you, Melissa?
Well, I mean, I take it at it doesn't matter what model I'm using, or what type of AI, I always know that it's going to be overconfident. And so knowing with that lens, it's always going to be your champion. And so like it's not going to give you a Debbie Downer answer. So you know, being aware of that from the get-go means that it's easier for you to be able to use that common sense or critical thinking to be able to kind of converse back and forth and to go, no, hang on a second, but have you considered this? But Chris had mentioned a really important one about citations and references. I'm in the Perplexity Fellowship actually in deep research. And I find it really fascinating because where we came from, you know, even from 2022 to where we're at now, where how it's actually providing us information, it's gotten incredibly, it's getting better and better and better. But does that mean that I don't go through my citations even when I'm doing deep research? No, I actually always double check everything. And I think that's something where naturally as humans, we go, great, I see that there's a citation. I'm not going to check it just because it's there. But you still always want to do that due diligence. I know that we want to do things quickly, but it really is a matter of going, okay, at face value, it's overconfident. It's going to give you that confident response. And the second part is, even though it's getting exceptionally intelligent, being able to kind of cross-check is really important. But Perplexity, you're speaking about Google and how the search is changing. I do want to say that we'll probably see, and for anybody that's on the call and is like, what is this Perplexity? If you go to perplexity.ai, that is foundationally how I search everything nowadays. I don't go on to Google, funny enough, unless I'm trying to find a business location or an image. And Perplexity actually just launched the image side as well. So how we're wanting to find information is changing, as Chris had said. And so Perplexity is a pretty powerful tool that's right in the game. And I think we're going to see it neck and neck with regards to how we search things.
Cool. Maybe we'll go to some questions.
Yeah, we have a couple here. The first one, with the vast amount of data that can be searched on the web, AI is good at providing resources, but how can we ensure that an argument is not being crafted by one side? For example, if I'm looking at adding a new software to my organization and asked to complete a review of competing projects, how can we prevent one-sided argument for one of those competitors? I imagine this could be applied to many other aspects of our personal or business lives.
That's a
That's
great
a loaded question. That's really good. Yeah. I think so. For those who don't know, there's a thing called prompt engineering, which is essentially learning to ask the question properly to the AI. How do I structure this in a way that I'm going to get the information out the way I want? And ensuring that you preface. So one of the things I will do often is if I'm using it for creative writing, I'll say, imagine you are a copywriter of the last 30 years. You are really good at these things, this things, you've done this. Write me an article based on these things. And so in that example, imagine you are an IT professional from the last 20 years and you want to compare two pieces of software um, from a very non-biased perspective, compare these two things. And at the end of the day, you kind of can't know. Is there a bias, right? If you're comparing, if you're using one of Google's AI and you're going to compare, um, you know, Google Apps or Google Workspaces versus Microsoft, is Google going to be intrinsically more biased to that? So make sure you're using something that you know can be objective. And then the great thing is there is a lot of different tools out there right now. There's all kinds of different providers and companies who are providing the tools. So just try it in a couple different too. Um, Make sure you're getting a good answer until your company has moved forward and built a really good strategy. And in which case you kind of have to roll the punches and audit it once in a while.
I know you do a lot in prompting and even have a prompt framework. So it seems to me that is the most critical piece of learning in engaging effectively with the tool is how you're prompting. And I'm wondering, is there like a framework you'd share quickly for folks that could be helpful in that, and then maybe if we can send it as a follow-up afterwards, a link to where they could learn more on how to do those things.
Yeah, so I have a framework called ACT. And so it kind of goes through a series of how you format a prompt effectively. And again, really happy to kind of share it with the group after this. But a lot of this is all down to context, like how much information you give it so that it can understand what it actually, what it really, in order to get an effective output or answer back, how much information are you giving it? Because ultimately it doesn't know anything about you. It doesn't know anything about its job, its role. And so for you as the conductor, you're going in and you can use basic framework with regards to, again, what is the role? What is your role? What are you looking for? You can go into very specific points that will, and especially like if you give it examples, like maybe you have an idea that you're trying to ask questions about and you have an example. Well, artificial intelligence loves that because then you've just given it context and it can draw from something. So again, that's a really high level. I won't go into the full ACT framework, but happy to
Sure.
share it afterwards.
Yeah.
But this is one thing that I do find there's always going to be biases. You can't get
Yeah.
around that. Like it's not I can go onto Google and it will be biased. That's why I love being able to always be almost awkward on AI. So you give me a response and I'm going to try to basically, why did you say that? I'm going to always ask that question. Can you support it for X, Y, and Z? Like I'll give it a couple of conversation points where I'm not just going to go with the first two options here. I'm going to kind of
Yeah.
question you a little bit more. And that even just that like half a minute that you decide to like, okay, I'm going to ask it a couple more questions. It just reaffirms some of the like, okay, it actually gave me a little bit more of an intelligent decision because it's seeing that I'm questioning it in a certain way. But I think everything is biased. And I think that's why it's so imperative that, all of us are contributing to
Yeah.
this AI world because our voices actually affect all of these knowledge bases, all of these models. And so if you're someone that's in a remote area or maybe it's a culture that is, it's not as visible. I think that's why it's so important. And if it doesn't have that and you notice that, what I always say to people is, you know what, you're there also to train the models back or to be able to put it back in, which is like
Yeah.
for me, that's the responsible AI piece. Okay, if it doesn't have this information, I want to feed it back in because guess what? That means it's getting another piece of intelligent information that it's not potentially sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's for me, it became the critical decision making because when I was looking at like the data that AI would technically have access to in abundance isn't always like the best representation of like humanity when you think about like the Instagrams, the Twitters, all the different things in which it can pull data and views. And I think we're not even viewing ourselves very nicely in that place. So I want to provide and be a part of compelling other folks to provide information that's more representative of the majority of us as humans. Ash, or sorry, Liv, is there another question that you'd have for us there?
There's a couple, but I know that we're kind of nearing time, so maybe I'll just pick one. But with many of the paid AI options stating that your data will be secure, would it still be the best practice to keep sensitive information out of the paid AI versions? With so many concerns regarding data privacy and the increase in data leaking or breaches, would there still be concerns regarding the paid versions as opposed to free?
I know that Chris has opinion on this, and this is what I'm looking forward to hearing, but I have an opinion too. I think it's important to always hold, unless you're at this enterprise version, which is a higher paying one, even if you're paying $20 a month for a model, that's not, even if they say, like, you have to be mindful of, okay, if it's in the hands of $20 a month is not high protection. So at least at least at an enterprise level at $200 a month, you're getting into, okay, well, there's some more, you know, you can actually go back and be able to see, okay, SOC 2, there's different like security pieces in place. But the most probably secure way to do it is like what Chris was saying in the beginning of our conversation about being able to have it local on your, you know, your network. But I'm happy for Chris to weigh in. I'm always cautious to put in highly confidential information into AI systems.
Yeah, and actually there's another question there, so I'm going to answer that one and this one at the same time because it gives you an idea of kind of how I approach the kind of data that I put in there. I am a video gamer, so there was one day I was playing a game and I had a question, so I opened up the voice version of Copilot and said, "Hey, I'm playing this game and I'm at this level. I have 2 missions I can go on. Which one should I go on?" And I'm literally having a conversation back and forth. That is something that is not personal to me, right? Like, that kind of data is not overly pertinent, and so I'm not that worried about whichever system that goes into, whether that's ChatGPT, whether that's Copilot, whether that's um, um, DeepSeek, which is a whole other conversation. That's like it's a Chinese owned. It is open source, but it's a Chinese owned model. So that's fine. I I have these symptoms and I want to understand what these possibly could mean. The most the most valuable personal data that we have now is our medical data. In fact, medical data is now worth approximately 10 times more than your social insurance number. Um, and so with that in mind, you know, me going and saying, "Hey, I have this symptom and this thing, I had this thing in the past, and I'm trying to understand, like, how does this go together?" It's amazing. It will come together and it will give you, get you up to date. As somebody who's not really good at biology, it helped me kind of understand. But I did that in a model where I knew the data was not going to go anywhere. I knew that it was not personal to me, and I may have even threw in a couple of fake items just so that I knew, like, I was throwing it off track. But um, being careful about that type of personal data, something that's really personal and really connected to who I am, be careful where that data is. If it's I'm planning a trip to Maui, help me pack, that stuff's great all day long. You could use whatever model you want. It's the this is my financial info. Don't let it take up all your photos because you took a photo of your passport at one point. Now it has all your passport info. Those are the kinds of things you have to worry about.
I know we're coming up to time, but for those that have to drop off, feel free to do so. But we do have a tradition where we ask a few random questions to folks that I think are always fun because whatever the subject matter, at the end of the day, we're still humans trying the best we can to move through the world. And so I'll ask you two, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received that you want to let us know about that you think is going to impact us all, or even the worst piece of advice you've ever received that you feel so compelled to tell us that you need to warn us of this one? Maybe I'll start with you, Melissa.
I'll give you the worst piece because I'm usually an optimist. So I've got lots of you know,
Okay.
ones that are best advice. The advice, just fake it till you make it. It's I feel like that advice is so damaging, and especially when we're looking at a leadership piece or you're just trying to build trust. Pretending that you know something when you don't, it often leads to like stress, poor decisions, and missed learning opportunities. I see it all the time. Everybody thinks that they have to like know it all in AI. And I love the fact that even the large companies like Google, Microsoft, nobody has a clue, really. Like they're all just learning as we go. So please do not fake it till you make it, and put yourself in a position of you don't need to know it all. You just need to start.
That's awesome. Thanks. Chris, how about you?
I'll go the opposite. I've been pessimistic all the time. I'll go optimistic.
Okay.
My my favorite piece of advice is everybody's fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind.
Mm,
And I really embody that from day to day, right? I'm having like not a great interaction with somebody, and from my younger days, taking that personally, and then realizing at one point, oh, like, wait, this is 99% chance this has nothing to do with me. There is 100 other inputs going on for this person right now. Everyone's
that's
fighting a
good.
battle you know nothing about. Be kind.
Mm. I love that one. Like knowing that you're one of the most tech people I know, and the advice you share is about like being a good human. And so I love that that like selfishly for the work that we get to do, is even in the tech world, being a good human is important. And then the
Hmm.
last one we have another tradition where we invite guests from the previous session to leave a question for the next ones, not knowing who they are or what it is they're going to be chatting about. The question I'm going to ask both of you is, looking back across your life, if you could relive one moment again, what would it be? And would you change anything about that moment?
Oh,
Ah,
that's a
that
that's a
that
that's
has
one that stumps
yeah.
me.
Can we use AI to answer this one?
Yeah. If I could relive one moment, I I would say in my younger years, being so open, so and certainly not naive, but being open to opportunity. I think it's so easy as we age to become more rigid. And I fondly remember going, back into even the teenage years of being able to be open and explore and be curious. And then of course real world hits in, and it really can, hinder a lot of progress. So that's what I go back to and try to embody all the time is
That's great.
openness and curiosity.
That's great.
Oh
It's
yeah.
so interesting you say that. I was listening to Melinda Gates' podcast on Simon Sinek this week, and she had said that exact thing, in that
Oh,
like
really?
through life, that there was so much that like built on, in terms of the responsibilities that she had, that has done a lot of personal work. And essentially some folks that have known her for a long time have shared that she seems to be embodying much more the openness of our adolescence, where you're just curious about the world and motivated in that way. And so she said that she's really striving for that now. So it's a really neat thing that you just shared that.
Interesting.
Chris.
Oh, yeah. I'd go back. I'd go back to being 5, right? I like if I could keep all the knowledge I have today and do it all over again with that knowledge, 100%. All the better energy and vibe I could put into the world, knowing, yeah, maybe that decision I made when I was 15 with that person was probably not the right one, but I was 15. I didn't know better. But now, many years later, it's being armed with that knowledge and just being able to be a better, or a better or
Great.
more informed version of myself. That's a no-brainer, and I do it all again starting from 5. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Well, thanks so much for your time. I know that we could have kept going and going and going, learning more and more, because it's such a huge conversation. And I imagine even for ourselves, we'll probably come back to it with maybe a little bit different focus, and um, as we move through like our journey, even as a group trying to help municipal organizations across Canada, and really any business for that matter. So I really appreciate you taking the time to connect with us and share your insights, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future. So thanks so much.
So
Thanks for
thank you very
inviting me.
much. Thanks for having
Awesome.
me.
It was fun.